Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. This is going to be the last video that I make in the series dealing with World War I. Unfortunately, with this video, I am going to have to summarize a lot of information, skip over some really exciting, interesting points of World War I. But as I mentioned before, if I was to go through and describe every single thing that happened, all the different situations that developed, we would be here for a very long time. The war lasted for 5 years. Some say even parts of it lasted into the 1920s, and there's just no way I could give the proper due to everything that needs to be done. And so what I'll do in this video is I plan on talking and reviewing what happened in the year 1916. Then we'll go into a little bit of detail of what happened in 1917, survey 1918, and then that will bring us to the end of the war, and this will be our final video. I hope you've enjoyed this series. I've enjoyed making it. I wish we could have been in the classroom for all of this, especially the one student that really wanted to get to chapter 17. I wish we could have been in person, but this is the next best thing that I have. All right, let's go and get started. As I've mentioned in previous videos, the Battle of Verdun happened in 1916. It took place and they started in February. And the Battle of Verdun lasted from February to December. And this is where Germany was pushing a major front, a huge invasion, trying to grind up and destroy as many of the French soldiers and artillery and military assets as they possibly could. They wanted to break the back of morale of France, and it was almost successful. And we'll talk a little bit later about how successful that was. Moving on, while Verdun was happening, there was a battle that was taking place on the border between Italy and Austria-Hungary. Where Austria-Hungary was an empire, so it controlled a nice little area there of Central Europe, just north of Italy. And there was a kind of a mountainy range there, and then a river that went through. And I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but basically the area was called Inazo, or Iazo. And there were over 9 battles that took place in this same area. Actually, in March to November, battles 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 all happened in the same area. One group would attack and would fail. The other group would then counterattack and fail. Then another counter, and then another counter. And so many of these battles happened that it was just this one massive bloody battlefield for years that took place there in northern France. Now, one of the things I haven't talked much about during this is what the United States is doing. I talked a little bit about the Lusitania and how we were going through and sending supplies and money to both England and Britain. Well, mostly we just started sending them to England, but the United States is doing the best they can to stay out of the war. They had established a policy of isolationism. They were not wanting to get involved militarily, putting U.S. boots on the ground in Europe. Did not want to do that. That's your continent. That's your problem. We'll send you money. We'll send you supplies, but we are not sending you troops. And to help picture what the United States looked like militarily, during 1916, in March, there was a Mexican uh, revolutionary. One way you could look at it, basically, like what we would kind of see as a Mexican freedom fighter. Some people would call him terrorist. That crossed the border from the United States or from Mexico into the United States and attacked a town in New Mexico. And we were basically chasing him down like it was a game of cowboys and Indians. Go look up pictures of Pancho Villa and his troops that are with him there, and also the soldiers that went after him. It looked like an old West movie with horses and six shooters and things like that. Whereas in Europe, they're fighting wars with artillery that can shoot like 15 miles. The United States is way behind militarily. We're fighting this, what the United States saw as a terrorist with cowboys and different things like that. And so we're pretty far behind here, all the way into 1916. Well, as the year progresses, in March, I had mentioned before that Germany had created a beautiful, amazing, massive navy. Like destroyers, cruisers, ships that shot torpedoes, battleships. Awesome navy. Awesome navy. Hundreds of thousands of tonnage worth of ships that they had there. But right at the beginning of the war, Britain had clamped down on a major port where these German ships were. They stayed just out of range, and the ships were not able to get out and do much during the war. They just sat there for most of the war. Well, finally, 1916 came along, and Germany was looking for things. They were looking to change some stuff up. And so they said, let's get that Navy out there and see what it can do. So what resulted was the Battle of Jutland. And what's interesting about this battle is that it's a naval battle. It took place at sea, but it lasted for 2 days. Most naval battles only last for an hour, 2 hours. The actual engagements and different things there, or just one day. But this lasted for a day and a half, 2 days that took place here. It was the largest naval battle in history, the most amount of tonnage that had ever emerged and where two sides had fought. A very complicated battle, naval battles and ships moving. It was a slow thing that took place. That's one of the reasons why it was happening there for over or on 2 different days. But while the battle was going on, one thing that's fascinating to me was that these ships were pretty much top of the line. They were almost never within 2 kilometers, 2 or 3 kilometers of each other, basically 2 miles. They never within 2 miles of each other. Most of the time, they were as far as 5 kilometers away or 3 miles away from each other, firing at each other. And think about how hard it is to hit a move somebody running. All right, if you play a game of dodgeball and there's somebody running across the dodgeball area and you try to throw a dodgeball and you have to lead them because if you throw it to where they were at where they are by the time they get there, you're going to miss. So you have to lead them a little. Well, imagine being on a ship that's moving, firing at another ship that's moving. Okay, so that game of dodgeball. You are trying to hit a person that's running, but you are also running. And you may even be running the different directions. So they're running this way and they are running that way. And so you're trying to do it that way. Okay. Then when you're on the ocean, remember the waves of the ocean. You have to take that into effect. So they are going like this, and you are going like this, and you are both running. You're both moving. And you're 3 miles away from each other. So it was a pretty crazy situation that they were able to hit each other at all. Pretty good calculation if you give it there. In the end, there was no clear victory. The Germans, they took their navy, went back to the port, repaired their ships, and it stayed there for the rest of the war. The naval ships never went back out. So technically, you could say the British won because it neutralized the German navy, but they did not win because they destroyed the British navy or the German navy. They just made it no longer willing to come out and fight. Then I talked about in another video the Battle of the Somme, or the Somme, the most bloody and deadliest day in British military history, where on the first day they lost over 50,000 soldiers. That happened in July. By the September came around at the same Battle of Somme, the tanks were first introduced in 1916. Then we go back a little bit again. We look at the other side of the Atlantic Ocean at America. By the time December comes around, December 18th, Woodrow Wilson, the president, looks at it and says, okay, guys, Europe, we need to figure some things out. We don't know who's going to win this war yet. Everyone is pretty sure England was going to, quote unquote, win. But Germany was holding firm. They were on a defensive war at this point. They looked at it and said, if you were going to beat us, you were going to lose a lot of soldiers. So maybe it would just kind of be a stalemate, which a lot of wars in history have ended that way. Not where one side just totally gets destroyed, but where they get tired of fighting and said, okay, let's stop here and we'll just end the war. Well, Woodrow Wilson steps in as the American president and says, guys, we need to figure something out. When this war's over, what'll it be for? What is the results? Why did we fight? Why did you guys fight this war? Now, honestly, England, France, Russia on the one side, Germany, Austria-Hungary on the other, are looking at America, looking at Woodrow Wilson, basically like, who do you think you are? We've been fighting this, we've been dying, we've been paying for this for years, and now you're like, oh guys, what are we gonna do with this? No, Woodrow. No, Miss President Wilson, not gonna happen. You stay on your side of the Atlantic and leave us alone. Well, that didn't happen. 1917 rolls around, and the beginning there, the U.S. Woodrow Wilson puts out what is called points of surrender. Basically, that if Germany would stop fighting now, these are the terms that they would agree to. And they were really good terms. Really good. There's only three there. You can look them up. And so Germany goes through, but they look at it and says, Germany's like, no, I think we can do better than that. And England and France are like, nope, we're definitely not doing that, because if we did that, then we wouldn't be able to make Germany pay for all of the stuff that they've destroyed. So the peace objectives have been stated in January of 1917. And America is starting, at least politically, to get more involved in this war. And Germany is beginning to realize, you know what? I don't think this war is going to end with us destroying France or England. Something needs to change. And so before, Germany had the unrestricted submarine warfare. Their U-boats, their underwater boats that they had there, their submarines would go and said if there are any ships within the area of this war, regardless of who they belong to, if they belong to France and England, we'll destroy them. If they belong to America, if they belong to Brazil, if they belong to Mexico, we will destroy them. Stop sending supplies to our enemies. That's what Germany was saying. Well, America, especially, looked at it and said, don't you dare sink our ships. Don't you dare kill our sailors and destroy our supplies. Well, Germany looks back and says, don't you dare come and do this. So Germany reinstitutes at the beginning of February the unrestricted submarine warfare, meaning that any ship, merchant, privately owned, military, doesn't matter what country it's from, if you're in the war zone, we will sink you. We're tired of you giving supplies to our enemies. And when you look at it from Germany's perspective, you can kind of understand. You don't want your enemy to be supplied by a third party. You want to make sure your enemy can be destroyed. Well, the submarine warfare causes a lot of political damage to Britain, or to Germany. And they go through there. In February, the USA severs diplomatic ties with Germany. They look at them and say, all right, if that's what you can do, Germany, we are no longer going to be discussing terms of surrender. We're severing our ties with you. You continue to sink our ships, then we will definitely declare war on you. Once again, Germany sees the end. They know we will not be able to win this war offensively. Let's win this war on the defense. So they create one of the most heavily and hardened, reinforced battle lines in world history, known as the Hindenburg Line, where they had a front here, but about 20 miles back, they create bunkers and trenches and pillboxes where you have the machine guns in them, and just for miles and miles in a deep, heavily fortified line. And then the Germans abandon the front line, slowly trying to kill as many soldiers as they can. And then the Hindenburg Line is where the French army just smacks and stops right on it. And so that's a big deal. Germany is going to hold the ground that they have won and will not give another inch back to the Allies. So once again, things are starting to happen. Germany needs to do something. And Germany can see what is about to happen. They can see the handwriting on the wall. If we allow America to join the Allies, we will lose. They've got millions of troops. They've got millions of dollars worth of supplies. They could quickly crank their society to develop war supplies, and we will just get overrun just by sheer numbers. So they come up with a plan. The plan is they contact Mexico. And they say, Mexico, here's the deal. What we're going to do is we're going to be allies with you, Mexico. Germany and Mexico will be allies. And Mexico, what we want you to do is attack the southern border of America. You saw how they handled Pancho Villa, how that did not work well for them. Eventually they caught him. But imagine if we, Germany, supported you. And they go through and they would talk about this. and they're sending these communications. There are in the Atlantic Ocean. There are giant cables that run across the Atlantic Ocean, and they're talking back and forth with Mexico through these telegrams. And basically, Germany says, when this war is over, if you help us, Mexico, here's what we'll do. When we get to the peace tables, when we begin talking about the treaties and different things like that, we will be, Germany, in a very good position to negotiate, and we will give you parts of America. We will give you back Texas, we will give you back New Mexico, we'll give you back parts of Arizona, maybe even parts of Southern California if you want. But Mexico, if you help us make a more favorable situation, this will be great. And what this would do, what this would cause the Americans to not send troops and supplies overseas to overrun Germany, because Germany had France on the ropes. Germany was about to break France's back. They really were. And France was about to surrender. We'll talk, like I said, we'll talk about that in just a moment. And if those American troops never came over to Europe, but instead had to stay in America fighting a war on their own land and on their own border, that would be huge for Germany. Well, the problem was, very early on in the war, the British had, some say illegally, some say it was wartime, so it was completely legal, had tapped in and started recording and had broken the secret code language of the Germans. So remember that cable I mentioned that went along the Atlantic Ocean? Basically, this is a super basic way to describe it. They went to that cable, they plugged into it, and were able to hear the messages Germany and Mexico were sending back and forth. And so they're recording them, they're writing them down, and then they're able to translate them from their secret coded language. And they were able actually to, Britain, one of the things that they were best at was code breaking. They broke the German code almost right at the beginning of the war. The problem was they knew Germany had been talking to Mexico for weeks, maybe even months before this time here in February of 1917. They know they'd been talking. But here's the thing. If Germany has been secretly encoded messages talking to Mexico, and Britain finds out about them, should Britain tell America? Well, our first reaction is automatically, yes, of course they should. Here's the problem. As soon as Britain tells America they've intercepted an encrypted message from Germany, they translated it, and then know what it says, then America now knows that Britain has tapped into that line and has been listening to communications going back and forth. Does that mean that Germany has been listening to encrypted messages that the Americans had been sending back and forth? Who else has the British been spying on? Not only that, but Germany would have had spies in, or at least sympathizers in British government, in American government, and they would have heard that, hey, there was a telegram that was intercepted that talked about this. Britain gave it to America. They know our code. So as soon as England released this information to the Americans, it would basically say they would no longer be able to translate and crack the codes because Germany would change it. So they waited and waited, and finally, when they felt America was ready, they released the telegram. They gave the telegram to America. This became known as the Zimmerman telegram. And so they get this telegram, and America's furious. They look at this and say they're trying to connive with the Mexicans, that they're going to do this, and the Zimmerman telegram basically is the nail in the coffin for Germany that takes place here. Finally, what happens at the end of the day? America declares war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. In April, they declare war in what takes place here. And it was not a moment too soon. Because it's amazing how we see the Lord working in history. Because if the Americans had waited just a little bit longer to declare war on Germany, they probably would not have declared war on Germany. Because just as the Americans were saying, okay, we will send supplies and help to Europe, soldiers, just as that's happening, the French army is beginning to mutiny. They're looking that their generals and commanders are sending them to die and be slaughtered. And the thing is, this is a new group of soldiers. The first group of soldiers that went to the front in World War I were excited. They were patriotic. They were ready to go. 1914, we will make France great, and we will go through and it'll be a glorious day. Well, this is 1917. This is 3 years later. These boys that are fighting now, these young men, were 15, 16, 17 years old when the war broke out. And so they've been living under this. And they've been seeing hundreds of thousands of their countrymen die because of the commanders sending them there. Well, they look at it and say, we're done. We will not do this. And so parts of the French military began to mutiny. The French, thankfully for the Allies, were able to get this mutinous situation under control. But it was a dire situation that France looked at and says, we need to get this war over now. And so they begin to do that. They begin to get the war done. The situation develops that in 1918, the war will come to an end. And like I said, I don't have time to discuss everything that goes on in here. There are battles and attacks and advances that are just amazing stories of things going through here. But basically to say that 1918 shows with the influx of fresh military, fresh supplies, and new ideas and soldiers from America onto the continent, they go through and the war does come to an end. But it takes almost an entire other year for this to happen, all the way to November. During this time, the Russian Revolution had taken place. And this was a big deal because when this communist Bolshevik revolution takes place here, and I can't get into the details for it, but when this happens, the result is that Russia pulls out of the war. Russia is no longer fighting here. Germany is able to turn all of its attention on the Western Front. Again, there are several things here that happen uh, perfectly with timing. If the Russian Revolution had been a little bit sooner, then America wouldn't have joined the war at the right time. If it happened a little bit sooner, the French would have been overrun because their mutiny would have destroyed their forces and the ability to be able to fight there. All of these things could have ended really badly, but all worked out in time, thankfully, that the Americans entering the war. And it took place there. And so 1918 shows the rise of the Bolsheviks and turns Russia under Lenin into a communist state that's there, going through to take place there, which would affect the rest of human history. Even today, we are seeing effects and results of the communist revolution in Russia. One thing that when the Americans finally did get to the war, they were called doughboys because the men that were coming were boys. America didn't have a standing army. All of these were young men, never fought in war before. Some of them may have fought against Pancho Villa, but that wasn't a war. That was a skirmish. That was, hey, let's go chase a terrorist kind of thing. And then they came through there and were able to go and help bring about the end. But remember that German fleet that I mentioned that was in the port city? By the beginning of November of 1918, there were some high-ranking German officials that looked at it and says, we are not going to win this war, but we are going to make it as costly and as painful for the Allies to win. So they came up with an idea. Let's take those ships, let's take our navies, let's go out in a glorious blaze of fire and death. We'll go. We know we're going to lose, but we're going to destroy as many of them as we can. Men, let's die for father country. Let's die for Germany. Let's go. And so when word got to the common naval units, the seamen there, the soldiers, or they weren't soldiers, but the Navy, those men are like, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to go down in a blaze. We're not going to die for a hopeless cause. That's ridiculous. So they mutiny, and that never happens there. Then on November 11th, at 11:11 in the morning, on November, or then on November 11th, at 11:11, 1918, an armistice is called, a ceasefire. All the way up, soldiers were there along their trench lines. They look at their watch. It's 10:30. A little over 40 minutes. Time went by. 10:50. 21 minutes. The guns are firing. Shots are going off. Rifles are clapping. The machine guns are sputtering. The artillery units are belching fire. 11 o'clock. 11:05. Finally, exactly at 11:11, across all fronts of the western trenches between the Allied forces and the Central Powers, the fronts and the guns go silent. And they stop firing. The treaty is signed at the Palace of Versailles in France, where they decide that Germany is basically to blame for the war, and sets up the anger and resentment that would bring us to World War II. A difficult situation for both sides. Britain and France wanted Germany to pay for everything, and eventually they would. They put major reparations, major restrictions on what Germany was able to do. And a young soldier who felt that Germany was betrayed by its government, betrayed by its people, and ultimately betrayed all around, would become the supreme leader of Germany and one of the most famous mass murderers in all of history. Adolf Hitler was a soldier in World War I, was recovering from a gas attack in a hospital when he heard that the war was over. And he never got over the fact that he felt betrayed, which led them there. So some people ask, what started World War II? Well, the end of World War I did. Because think about it. The guns along the Western Front were firing all the way up until 11:11 on March 11th. What if you're in the German trenches and your buddy right beside you, who had been with you for so long, at 11:09 gets killed? That's infuriating. And then you get blamed for everything? Germany didn't even start the war. The war started because some Serbian terrorists in Sarajevo shot the Archduke, the crown prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and now Germany's the one that's getting blamed for everything? There's a lot of hatred and resentment in Germany that they go through and were willing to fight for things, that the results would come there. As I mentioned, this is the last video I have in this series. I wish I could have spent much more time in 1918 dealing with other situations, things that happened. Lawrence of Arabia, look that up. That's an incredible story of how a British officer went and led troops across the desert, nomadic troops, to attack different cities and just doing amazing things there. There are the times when the Communist Revolution released all of these secret papers to the world of all of these secret agreements that Russia had made with other countries. There's the Sykes-Picot Agreement. There's so many different things I could have gone over that I just did not have time to, and I wish I could have. But I hope this has been informative. I hope this is an enjoyable time. One thing I want you to do, it's not homework, but just for the fun of it, watch this video and then comment down below what was your favorite thing you learned about with World War I. I hope you guys have a great day, a great summer. I enjoy teaching you. Have a good day.